Welcome to The Explainer. So, have you ever looked at a huge successful company, one that seems to be doing everything right, and then almost overnight it just collapses? It's a puzzle, right? Well, today we're going to dig into that exact mystery, using the incredible work of Clayton Christensen.
Let's start right here. Back in 1964, Fortune magazine wasn't just praising Sears, they were calling it an extraordinary powerhouse. I mean, this company was the absolute gold standard of how to run a business. Everybody wanted to be like Sears.
So, that's the big question, isn't it? If Sears and so many other giants like them were doing everything by the book, getting praise from all the experts, how on earth did it all fall apart? What went wrong?
All right, let's dive right into this paradox, because it is a really puzzling kind of failure. It's this idea that following the very rules of good management can actually steer you straight into a disaster. And here is the absolute bombshell at the heart of Christensen's work. It wasn't bad management that killed these companies. It was good management. The very things they teach you in business school. Listen to your best customers, go after higher profits, focus on the biggest markets. Those were the exact things that ended up being their downfall.
To really get our heads around this, we need to talk about two different kinds of innovation. And the perfect place to see this in action is the hard disk drive industry. It's kind of like studying fruit flies to understand genetics. The whole life cycle happens so fast that the patterns just become crystal clear.
Okay, so first, you've got what's called sustaining innovation. This is basically the bread and butter of any successful company. You're just making your good products even better for the customers who already love you and pay you the most. Better, faster, stronger. It's a totally rational, proven way to succeed.
And then there's the troublemaker, disruptive innovation. These are the products that are often way simpler, cheaper, and more convenient. But here's the key. At first, they're actually worse when you measure them by what a company's best customers want. To a big, successful leader, they don't look like a threat at all. Honestly, they look kind of like a joke.
And here's where the two paths really diverge. See, sustaining innovation is a perfect match for a big company. It's a no-brainer. You get higher profits from your best customers. But disruptive innovation, it looks like a terrible business idea. You're going to serve some tiny new market with a cheap product that makes you less money? It goes against every single rational impulse a manager has.
So this is how the invasion actually happens. Look, back in 1980, the new disruptive tech is just objectively worse and only some tiny group of people wants it. But it keeps getting better on its own little track. At the same time, the old established tech also gets better. So much better that it actually overshoots what most people even need. And then, bam! By 1988, that disruptive thing crosses the good enough line, and all of a sudden the main market has a cheaper, simpler option. The whole game has changed.
And that brings us right to the heart of the matter, the innovator's dilemma. That moment, we're doing everything by the book, following all the rules of good business, leads you straight to failure.
And this whole thing is just tragically predictable. It's like a 6-step march to doom. First, some clever engineer inside the big company comes up with a cool but kinda underpowered idea. Then the marketing team does their job. They ask the best customers, who logically say, nah, we have no use for that. So the company shelves it. But then a little startup takes that same idea and finds a new market for it. They make it better, they move up market, and by the time the big company realizes what's happening, it's just too late.
So why does this keep happening? Well, just follow the money. Put yourself in the shoes of a manager in 1981. You can put your resources into a project for mainframe computers with these juicy 60% profit margins, or you can invest in this new, unproven desktop thing with what, 25% margins? Where are you going to put your best people? The choice is obvious. You chase the better profits up market every single time. And it's not just about the margins, it's about sheer size. It's a growth problem. For a small startup, finding a new market worth $8 million is a massive win. But for a $4 billion giant, you need to find $800 million in new business just to keep growing. That tiny new market is basically a rounding error. It's just not big enough to get on the CEO's radar until it's big enough to be a serious threat. So, is this whole thing just inevitable? Are great companies basically doomed? Well, according to Christensen, no. There actually is a way to escape this trap. Let's talk about how you can manage this kind of disruptive change. The solution is actually pretty elegant.
The idea is, you can't fight the DNA of the mothership, so don't even try. Instead, you create a totally new, separate organization. You spin something out that's small enough to get excited about small victories, with a budget that makes those low-profit markets look really attractive. The story of Quantum is just the perfect example. They were a big leader in 8-inch drives, and they totally missed the next wave, the 5.25-inch drive. So when their own engineers came up with the next disruption, the 3.5-inch drive, Quantum did something radical. They funded a completely independent company, plus development. And free from the mothership's rules, Plus went after that new market, became a huge leader, and was eventually bought back by Quantum as a massive success.
And this quote from a manager at a different company, man, it just says everything. You need a team that sees a $50,000 sale as a huge win. Inside a billion-dollar company, that's just background noise. The scale of the organization has to match the scale of the prize.
Okay, so let's bring this all home. Now that we know all this, how can we actually use these lessons? How can we get better at spotting the next big disruption before it's too late?
You can really think of these as the 5 unbreakable laws of disruption. They show that a company's own resources, its values, its processes, they create this powerful gravity. You're constantly being pulled towards your current customers, toward the big markets, and away from those small, uncertain places where the future is actually being born. Your greatest strengths literally create your biggest blind spots.
So this means you have to fundamentally shift your thinking. When you're facing real disruption, you can't just write a 5-year plan for a market that doesn't even exist yet. It's impossible. Your goal isn't to execute a rigid plan. It's to create a plan for learning, one that is all about testing, discovering, and probably failing a few times along the way. And that brings us to the final question, and this one is for you to think about. Look at your own job, your own industry. What is that simpler, cheaper, kind of clumsy-looking technology out there right now that everyone is ignoring? The one that looks unappealing today, but might just change everything tomorrow. What are you ignoring?